What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Erich von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Erich his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Erich von Däniken Legacy Night, live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late-night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with US Navy researcher and physicist Bruce Maccabee, who is the author of the UFO FBI Connection, The Secret History of the Government's Cover-Up. Now, Bruce received his PhD in physics from American University, Washington, D.C. in 1970. He was hired by the US Department of Navy to be a physicist researcher at what was then called the Naval Ordnance Laboratory, or NOL for short, a division where he has worked ever since. Now, Dr. Maccabee says that with the Freedom of Information releases and document leaks, we're learning more about what happened years ago than what they knew years ago, in regards to the UFO phenomena. Now, Dr. Maccabee, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I am delighted to have you on, Bruce. I really am. You know, I was researching you earlier on today, and you've been doing this work for so long now. I believe your interest in the subject of ufology started in the late 60s. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. Well, I was going to school to earn a PhD in physics at American University in Washington, D.C.
Wow. Okay. And it's really, I mean, the books that you've done, they're fantastic books. I've got your latest one just coming up on the screen now, called The FBI-CIA-UFO Connection: The Hidden UFO Activities of USA Intelligence Agencies. And it's a great read. It really is a fantastic book. What drove you to sort of write this book as well?
Well, first of all, I started writing it in the 1990s, but I had the FBI Files in 1977, and I was driven to write the book. Really, the spark that lit the fire, you might say, was the X-Files TV show, and the fact that the FBI tour guide apparently didn't even know there was a file on UFOs at the FBI headquarters. In 1993, the X-Files began on TV, and on a Sunday magazine of the Washington Post, they had an article about somebody taking a tour of the FBI headquarters building. And one of the people on the tour asked the question of the tour guide, "Where do you keep the X-Files?" And the tour guide said, "There are no X-Files, that's just fiction." But I knew differently. I knew that I had a ton of pages from the FBI, many of them labeled Security Matter -X. And so I said to myself, this definitely calls for some sort of a book. And I started writing, and I wrote for several years, and finally managed to get an early version of this book published in the year 2000. And then I rewrote it. I didn't rewrite the first book, but I added on a bunch of stuff that corresponds to my experiences with the CIA. And now I call it the FBI-CIA-UFO Connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a little quote just at the beginning of your book as well. It says, "These are the real X-Files. The truth is in here." I love that.
Yes.
That's great. Now, you worked for the Navy, I believe. And what was your role in the Navy then? What was you sort of researching?
I started working for the Navy in January of 1972, and I was doing physics research. I was not in the Navy on a ship or something. I was working at a Navy laboratory in the Washington, D.C. area. And at this laboratory, I was doing optical data processing, generation of underwater sound with laser beams, a number of other types of projects over the 36 years that I worked there. Turned out to be important that I was working on laser-generated underwater sound in the late 70s and early 80s, because that resulted in a contact that I made with the CIA in 1984. But that's a longer story that we could go into. Yeah, I worked in the Navy and retired in 2008.
Okay. And okay, for us Europeans who, really don't know that much about the FBI or CIA, just very briefly, what is the difference between the FBI and the CIA?
Well, they're both investigative units, but the FBI is a criminal investigating unit in the United States, which has responsibilities cutting across state lines. In other words, the whole United States is the responsibility of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Central Intelligence Agency, on the other hand, keeps track of what's going on in the rest of the world. It's not a criminal agency the same way the FBI people could arrest you. FBI people can arrest you. The CIA people could expose you. So the main difference is the CIA keeps track of what's happening elsewhere. However, it turns out in 1952 they started worrying about the UFO situation, and although that was a domestic situation, they nevertheless investigated it.
Well, thank you for just giving us the breakdown there on the differences between those agencies. Why, in your opinion, then, were the FBI and the CIA connected with looking into UFO incidences or activities within the USA then?
Well, the answer for the FBI is the Air Force intelligence asked the FBI to investigate witnesses when the UFO, what you might call a modern UFO phenomenon, began in June of 1947. June 24th, 1947, the day that will live in infamy or infamy, depending on how you treat the UFO problem. That was when Kenneth Arnold saw objects flying past Mount Rainier and timed their flight to Mount Adams, maybe 50 miles south, and came up with a speed of about 1,700 miles an hour, which he decreased to 1,200 miles an hour when he reported it, simply because he couldn't believe the speed that he was calculating. But anyway, the point is that his report his report of seeing these, what he thought were new Air Force aircraft, new jet fighter type of aircraft, except that he couldn't see any wings or any engines or any control surfaces, ailerons, tail wing, whatever. He thought it was some new development of the Air Force and told his friends about it, and they told the press, and the press publicized the story, and over the next few days, everybody in the United States and other places in the world learned about these objects that Kenneth Arnold had seen. And then other reports started coming in to the newspapers. And within a few weeks, the Air Force was inundated with reports, shall we say. And they asked the FBI to investigate some of the witnesses to find out if there's any communist subversion going on. If communist subversives were communist sympathizers were generating spurious reports of high technology craft flying through the air, so as to make the American people doubt the capability of the Air Force to control the skies. So the Air Force asked the FBI to get involved. That's how the FBI got involved. The FBI did investigate a number of witnesses in the summer of 1947, and they very often filed the reports under the security classification Security Matter -X. That's why I call these the real X-Files. So when Christopher Carter started writing the X-Files TV show, he got at least one thing right. It really was an X-File. The FBI investigated for a few months and then got out of the investigating business, but they had already established the connection between the FBI and Air Force intelligence. And this resulted in the Air Force telling the FBI stuff that they didn't tell the American people. And the FBI was like a black hole. Information went in, nothing came out. In the late 40s and early 50s, nobody expected that 20 years later there would be a Freedom of Information Act that would allow civilians to access all the information that the FBI was generating. So the Air Force told the FBI, like I said, stuff that they didn't tell the American people. And there are very salient documents in the FBI file which show that the Air Force had concluded that, the typical statement, UFOs are real, but what they meant by UFOs are real is these things were actually interplanetary, and the Air Force had apparently concluded that in the late 40s and early 50s, and it shows up in the FBI file.
Absolutely. And
you asked me about the CIA.
Yes.
The CIA got involved in 1952 when there was a huge flap of sightings in the United States. The year with the largest number of sightings, and I'm sure that the Air Force intelligence was afraid that an interplanetary war was about to begin, because in June, July, and August they had hundreds and hundreds of sightings, tens of sightings per day, and that resulted in a press conference. General Vandenberg, who was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, directed General John A. Sanford, the Director of Intelligence, to hold a press conference and essentially get the press off our back, in a sense, come up with some explanations that could damp down the interest. There have been so many sightings that just about every town in the United States had a sighting reported in a local paper. And then there were sightings over the White House, in the area around the White House and the central Washington, D.C. restricted areas. on 2 weekends, and that was just too much for the Air Force. They had to do something about this this problem of the too much interest by the press. So they held this press conference by General John Sanford, saying that they had looked at about between 1,000 and 2,000 sightings, and found that credible people were making incredible reports. But as far as he was concerned, the sightings of radar targets around the Washington, D.C. area were a result of weather effects on the radar, commonly known as radar angels, and other weather phenomena accounted for visible sightings and so on throughout the United States. Basically, Sanford told the press that as far as he was concerned, UFOs or flying saucers were all hot air. And the press was happy and went away, and the next day so everything was, quote, explained, unquote, as a weather phenomena, and that sort of decreased the interest of the press in reporting and publishing UFO reports. So although the reports continued beyond that. Well, there had been so many reports that the CIA decided they better look into it too, because they were aware there were reports from other countries. The CIA had people in most countries paying attention to what was published in the press, and among other things, on aerodynamic activities in these other countries. So the CIA was well aware that there was something going on elsewhere, not just in the United States. And so they began looking into the situation themselves in August of 1952.
Yeah.
And within a few months they had concluded there was something real. But then along came this decision to hold a review panel of the situation, which was held in January or February, I forget, of 1953, and they decided that they could explain everything. At least that's what has been publicized here. After that, after early 1953, the CIA was only marginally involved, but they didn't keep track of the situation. Point is that they had generated documents which were released under the Freedom of Information Act in December of 1978. Same way as the FBI documents were released to me in May of 1977 as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request. So that's how these two agencies got involved. And when you combine the information in these two agencies with the information in the Air Force Intelligence, which is what I've done in the book, you come up with a story that says by the end of the 40s or early 50s, the Air Force had kind of concluded that these things, at least some UFOs, were in fact interplanetary craft, and they didn't dare tell anybody, and so they kept the information bottled up. This is all independent of whether or not the so-called Roswell incident is true. Obviously, if the Roswell incident involved the crash of an extraterrestrial craft, then the Air Force certainly knew the answer. But the argument that I made in my book is based on unquestioned documents. Whereas with the Roswell case, there's a lot of questions over what really happened.
Yes, and I've come across interviews recently where they talk about downed UFO crafts in 1941. For example, the MO-41 crash in Cape I forget the state name, Cape Colorado, I think it was, but it's in Missouri. Have you heard of that case? No. Well, I only mention it because, it took place before the 50s, and the FBI did have, well, from the evidence that's been gathered, did have definitely an involvement with that case because there was a local FBI office, in that state at that time, or in that town, shall I say, in that time. So, it could have been going back way before Roswell, with the involvement with the FBI. It's an incredible subject, this is, because in your opinion, why do you think they've never come forward to reveal that there may be something outside of the scope of the norm in the sense of these UFOs? Is it because potentially they have crashed recovered vehicles and they're trying to reverse engineering them? Or is it because as well they know something we don't know?
Well, I'm sure they know something we don't know. I suspect that whatever they know has convinced them that it would be detrimental to society to release the information. Initially, when the first sightings occurred in the United States, and they also occurred at various places around the world, but when the initial sightings were made, and the Air Force was puzzled over what it was, it only took them about a year to conclude that some of these things might be interplanetary. I suspect that the initial response was, once we know these things are real, we don't want to tell anybody because they could make extremely effective transportation means for weapons. In other words, the military aspects, or probably the initial aspects, kept the Air Force from telling the American people what was really going on. If you want to keep something secret, you don't tell your friends, because if you tell your friends, your enemies are going to find out some way or other. Well, so initially, I would say it was a question of military advantage to know that flying saucers were real, and then yes, if there were crash discs, one or more, could we do back engineering and learn some new physics and stuff like that from these craft? Now there may be also less physics-oriented reasons for keeping the information from American people and basically the whole world. That I could only speculate on. You know, a typical trivial explanation for keeping quiet would be they're here to eat us, or something like that. You can make up lots of possible reasons.
Well, do you think
what they're doing might be detrimental to society, and so the Air Force initially concluded it was safest to say nothing, try to damp down the whole interest in the subject.
Do you think as well that potentially they really don't understand the nature of reality of what's occurring here with these unidentified flying objects, and it's that big the picture of it is in scope that it's, you know, we're talking interdimensional. We're not even talking of an understanding of a reality that we have right now, and that's how far scoped these these visitors are, in a sense, in who they are.
Well, again, this is all speculation. There may be people who know the answers to all these questions, and they're not telling anybody. Everybody on the outside, like myself, who has concluded that they're real, but we just don't know what they're doing, why they're here, what they're doing, who they're doing it to, where they're doing it, all the W questions that you can think of.
Do you think they've always been here?
They could well have been. I mean, just because they started being reported in 1947 doesn't mean that they weren't here 10 years earlier, or 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years ago. The age of the universe and even the age of the Earth is so great that if something happened millions of years ago, if they had discovered the Earth millions of years ago, and they could have diddled around in our development, playing with DNA, you might say.
Yes.
Lots of life and generating stuff. So you can think of all sorts of possibilities once you go into the
that's incredible
technology regime of, if you can control individual atoms, you can do just about anything.
Yes, there is that to it. We're talking of a technology that's more like a god, in a sense, than what we can perceive is the science of the future. I mean, it's way beyond that. Okay, just sticking with your book though as well, do you think the FBI and CIA are still investigating even to today, in a sense, the UFO phenomena?
Well, the FBI has said that they got out of the business, officially got out of it in 1947, but as I said, they acted as a black hole and collected information from the Air Force for years. But they didn't really do much investigation. The book starts off with a Rolani Zamora Socorro, New Mexico case of April 1964 as an example of one of the last cases that the FBI actually recorded and investigated. So far as I know, they don't do any investigation now. If they get any information that could be related to flying saucers, they turn it over to the Air Force or publicize it, but they don't investigate. So the CIA was a little bit different. The CIA got interested in this UFO subject in the latter half of 1952, and then it sort of got out of it, except for monitoring the situation. They didn't really do much investigation. The CIA got involved in paranormal stuff in the 1970s, in the early 70s, and one of the things that they were testing was so-called remote viewing. And these remote viewers would sit in a room and think about something or other happening at some coordinate, some location in the world, and occasionally these remote viewers would think they were remotely viewing a flying saucer. The guys running the CIA program didn't know whether flying saucers were real or not, but this sort of made them think we better find out what's going on here if our remote viewers see flying saucers. I'm not going to argue whether or not remote viewing is real. I'm just saying that this is the situation they were confronted with. And then they began having some interest in the flying saucer subject, but it's hard to tell a complete story of what was going on, because there's several threads of events going on involving the CIA during the 70s and 80s, at least, until they shut down the paranormal remote viewing program in the late 80s to early 90s. I have written about my own experiences with the CIA in this new book, and I got involved with the CIA sort of the same way I got involved with the FBI. Mainly, I was doing a UFO investigation. In the case of the FBI, in the middle 1970s, I was analyzing photos taken by a farmer in McMinnville, Oregon, in May of 1950, the famous Trent photos of McMinnville, Oregon. I was analyzing those photos and studying the whole case. I also had collected together a lot of the testimony that the Trents had told people over the years. I myself had talked to Mrs. Trent a number of times on the phone. And I found out that Mr. Trent had said that he was visited by FBI agents at the place where he worked soon after his photos were published in May of 1952, and in May of 1950. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if, under the freedom of information, I could get some information out of the FBI on their investigation of Mr. Trent. So I wrote a letter to the FBI asking about if they had any information on Paul Trent of McMinnville, Oregon. And then as a sort of a secondary thought, I said, oh, by the way, if you got any other UFO stuff, please let me know. And I sent off my letter with a request. This was in 1976. The FBI, the Freedom of Information Act, had become operative about a year earlier. So I was writing under the Freedom of Information Act, and I got, within 2 weeks, I got back a letter saying your response is number 30,225 or some big number like that. And I thought I might hear something by the turn of the century, and I sort of put it out of my mind. 6 months later, I got a call from an equally surprised FBI agent saying, well, there's over 1,000 pages of documents here in the FBI. And that's how I got the FBI file and got involved in the FBI stuff because of a photo investigation. In 1978, there were sightings in New Zealand that involved people flying on an airplane, a news crew with a color movie camera and a tape recorder, the air crew and the pilot and the co-pilot being recorded by the air traffic control center, the ground radar air traffic control center, Wellington, New Zealand. And a whole bunch of things happened on this trip, which made international news. And I got involved with investigating these New Zealand sightings, which were world famous back in 1970, early 79. I got involved with investigating these and looked for some consultation on the radar aspects of the sightings. This is all, of course, spelled out in detail in the book. And that led me to contact with the CIA, where I was told, if you tell us about the sightings, we'll help you with the radar interpretations. And so in the spring of 1979, I went to CIA headquarters with some fears and trepidation because it had only been a few months earlier, in December '78, that they had released over 900 pages of CIA files on the subject as a result of a lawsuit. And the CIA was generally considered to be one of the bad boys of ufology. Some people thought the CIA was controlling the whole subject, or controlling access to information on the whole subject. So I didn't know what I was getting into, but I went there and I talked about the sightings and had a couple of meetings with CIA guys. And basically, they learned what I knew about the sightings, and I didn't learn much about what they knew. And I assumed that was the end of my contact with the CIA in the late spring of 1979. 5 years later, in 1984, I received a phone call from a guy who wanted to know this research I was doing about generating underwater sound with laser beams. He had discovered that the Russians were doing the same sort of stuff, and he wanted to know whether we were up to par, if we were doing what they were doing. He wanted to make sure that they weren't learning something of potential anti-submarine warfare interest. We didn't. He wanted to make sure we were learning the same stuff. And so that he called me up and found out that I was doing this research on laser-generated underwater sound, and wanted me to make a presentation at CIA headquarters on this subject. And then he called up another time on the same day, and this time he brought up the subject of UFOs, saying that he knew that I had been there some time before on the subject, and so that connected me up with the CIA for a second time, and that connection lasted for 15 or some years, during which time I learned a little bit about what the CIA was doing. Again, this is all spelled out in the book, and I happened to, because I was involved with the CIA, I was asked to write a UFO briefing for President Clinton's science advisor, John Gibbons, in April of 1993, the year that Clinton took office.
Yeah.
That briefing is in the book.
Well, oh God, it's just so fascinating. Your work is, it really is, what you've done with this information as well. I mean, there was a time, from what I've read in the book as well, I think I read this in the book, that in the late 60s, not the late 60s, but the actual CIA at one point was investigating the Air Force, who were investigating UFOs as well.
Well, that's what I said in the book. When the CIA began interest in August of 1952 as a result of this big monster flap of sightings that occurred over June, July, and August. In early August of 1952, the CIA decided they better find out what was going on because they were getting reports from all over the world. And as I wrote in the book, whereas the Air Force investigated the sightings themselves,
yeah,
the CIA basically started off by investigating the Air Force. Was the Air Force doing a good job in collecting and analyzing sighting reports? And the CIA concluded that if all you wanted to do was to collect reports and divide them into explained and unexplained, that was basically all the Air Force was doing. The Air Force was not studying the unexplained reports to find out why are they unexplained. So the CIA was not particularly impressed with what the Air Force was doing. And the CIA, one of the CIA scientists apparently got a little frightened, I guess, in December of 1952, because of what was coming in, the information he was getting. And but the so-called Robertson panel, or review panel, in late January 1953, stopped on the whole subject as far as the CIA was concerned. And the CIA, after that, sort of collected sightings from other countries, but they didn't really do anything with them.
So, okay, obviously UFOs aren't just prone for or bound for America. I mean, this is a worldwide issue. So the CIA and the FBI must have been in communications with other intelligence agencies throughout the world in regards to this subject, surely.
Well, I'm sure they were, but the connections don't readily show up. Certainly, I know that there are sightings throughout the world, and at the Robertson Review panel in late January, early February of 1953, one of the people said, "Well, if UFOs were real, they would be seen all over the world, not just in the United States." What he didn't know was that they had been seen all over the world, but the Air Force hadn't provided that information. Air Force intelligence hadn't provided that information to the CIA review panel. And so they arrived at a wrong conclusion because of having bad data, you might say.
Well, yeah. Okay. Now, obviously, the CIA then, from what you're saying, was in contact with a lot of the presidents that have come in time to debrief them, or is this above the presidency's eyes only, in a sense?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the presidents, since Eisenhower, have been left out of the loop, so to speak. After all, presidents are around for 4 or 8 years, and then they're gone. And this subject continues. I suspect that what has happened is the really good stuff, the really hard information, has been bottled up in some way and is controlled by some sort of private company, contractor, with a budget buried in the black budget, which is tens of billions of dollars every year.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised neither. I mean, do you think in the foreseeable future, and that could be 10, 20 years, that we'll ever have any proof that these were intelligently controlled crafts, and that, the FBI and the CIA will come forward with undeniable proof that we have been visited? Or, in your opinion, after all these years doing this research and the journey it's taken you on, do you think we'll never be any wiser because it will just full stop never be released?
Well, first of all, I would say that based on what I've done, at least, I'd say that these things are real. Some UFOs are interplanetary craft, as the Air Force suspected years ago. Whether they will ever tell us about it or not is a matter for speculation. And I guess that's about all I could say.
Okay. I've come across reports in cases where they felt that the craft was as conscious as we are, in a sense. It was actually the craft was intelligently conscious. I don't know if I'm using the right words there, but that's how it's been, documented and perceived by people that have had close encounters.
Yes, all sorts of things are reported in close encounter cases. There's a wide variety of phenomena. I put some of that stuff in my other book, the Abduction in My Family book,
Yes.
which is a UFO fact book built inside, so that by the time you finish reading the whole book, you're somewhat of an expert on the whole subject.
Yes. Yes.
In that case, I put in some of the interesting stuff that abductees tend to report. The problem is it's not quantifiable or verifiable other than by what the people say, and noticing correlations across cases. There are a lot of cases that report beams of light coming out of these craft and lifting things, doing stuff like that.
Yes. Yes, it's and even not just interdimensionally travelled, but also from the future they talk about as well, that these are future craft coming back to whatever they're coming back for, observations or to try to change things, I don't know. I mean, it sounds so crazy, but that's what's been reported.
Right, and each person who's involved closely with this phenomenon sort of has their own impression of what's going on.
No. Obviously, there are those people that come forward in the Air Force and that have not broken their sort of secrecy in a sense, but have been what people would class as whistleblowers. Have you come into contact with any whistleblowers from the Air Force or any other agencies?
Yes, I have. One man who I'm planning to publish a book on his own personal experiences with being on the periphery of the subject, or the periphery of the cover-up, you might say. But he has said enough things of interest to make it worthwhile documenting in a book, I think. My own experience has been that I sort of know there's stuff out there that I don't know, but I don't know what it is.
Well, I really want to get into your abduction case as well, your previous book. But just one other quick question as well in regards to the photo evidence. It's very true that some people will be just taking a photograph of something in the sky, never having the idea of UFOs in their head at the time. It wasn't there before they took the photo. Once they developed the photo, there's a craft on there. And it's almost like it's some sort of science that we don't understand.
Well, I get a lot of photos like that to analyze, accidental UFOs or whatever they are. In many cases, it can be explained. The image is fuzzy enough so you can't be sure. For example, it isn't a bird or something like that. Those cases, they're sort of like cases that don't have a witness, except a witness maybe in a negative sense, saying, I didn't see anything before the photo, I didn't see anything after the photo, or there's the photo and here's something is in it. Well, in a situation like that, you have to realize that a small thing close up can appear the same as a big thing far away. You just don't know how far it was. There's no way of knowing. Unless you already knew how big it was, you wouldn't have an idea of how far away it was. And the pictures are often fuzzy. Very, very rarely do you come up with an accidental UFO like that you can definitely say is a real object up in the sky. And nowadays we have a lot of problems with hoaxes. CGI, computer-generated imagery. Take a photo of a background scene. Tell your computer application to put a Model A UFO image into the picture, and it'll do it. And now, presto changeo, you've got yourself a UFO photo, proof of UFOs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so true. Sure, go ahead.
It gets harder if you try to make a movie out of it or a video, because then you have a whole bunch of frames or something a whole bunch of frames of the video that have to be done correctly.
But then you have come across cases which are documented in your book. Well, there was one case where there was evidence left over, like magnetic evidence.
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up. That's the last case that I briefed to the FBI. And it's an extremely unusual thing because there was a UFO sighting on a Friday night by a lady who was driving home, and she saw a sighting line towards her house. She's looking towards her house. She sees coming up from behind the house this typical disc-shaped craft that goes up to a certain altitude, levels off, moves off, and then zips away. And she told her husband about it. Now, her husband was an oil mining guy. He looked for oil wells, and this was in Florida. They have don't have oil wells in Florida, but he had a device known as a magnetometer to detect metal casings that they drive into ground when they do find oil. When they find oil in various places, they will often drill a hole down to where the oil, approximately where the oil is, and put in a metal casing to hold the ground from collapsing in. And then they put a top on the casing, and then they bury it. And just leave it there with a notification that there's something buried at this location that might be useful for getting oil. So this guy had a magnetometer device that was used to locate these wellheads. In other words, it would locate a big piece of pipe that's 5 or 10 feet down underground. He had a sighting many years before this sighting by his wife. He had a sighting in which an object had gone over his car and it made the needles on the instruments, those instrument panel needles, go awry. And he thought it was a magnetic effect of this object. So when he gets home at night and his wife tells him about this UFO she saw, it was apparently out in his backyard, he decides the next day to take his magnetometer out and see if there's any magnetic effects associated with this sighting that his wife had made. And lo and behold, he finds this huge magnetic field, which is described in the book. And he called up UFO investigators in the area. This is down near Pensacola, near Gulf Breeze, Florida. He called up UFO investigators that came and videotaped him walking around with his magnetometer. And the magnetometer generates an audio tone depending on how strong the magnetic field is. Low tone for a weak field and very high frequency for a strong field. And this audio tone was recorded on the videotape. So you have a test instrument device, which I was able to calibrate with the man's help, calibrate the device to determine how strong a magnetic field was actually being detected. And when you see this video of the men walking around, watching him, two UFO investigators walking around videotaping this man, essentially he's waving his magnetometer. The magnetometer is sort of a long rod that detects the field, and he waves this around in various locations, and he gets at a very high frequency. This is from the physics point of view, this is impossible. He's down in sandy ground, basically, in Florida, near the Pensacola. There's nothing there that's magnetic. He moves his wand towards the top of a tree, and he gets the highest frequencies. But there's nothing there that's magnetic. Also, they found 3 depressed circles in a pond right adjacent to the same place where the field was. 3 depressed circles in the grass at the bottom of a pond. So here you have a situation where you've got 2 types of physical evidence. One of them, the magnetometer, being extraordinarily unusual, and there's no apparent source. It's like there was some magnetic field that was somehow left behind after the UFO left, or the UFO hadn't left after all, or maybe it had come back and had somehow cloaked itself so it couldn't be visible. The men were obviously looking around to make sure that there was no trickery involved, and that there was no big spacecraft that they could see. They couldn't see anything, they just detected the huge magnetic field. So this is a case of actual physical effects that, as I said, from the point of physics, are impossible. It's all explained in the book.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that. Just going to your book, Abduction in My Family. Now, I didn't get a chance to read that book neither. But was there an actual abduction in your family, or is this stories of other people's abductions in their families?
Well, the Abduction in My Family book is a combination of a novel with a fact book built in. I call it faction because the fact book that's built inside could be cut out of the book and pasted the pages of the fact book pasted together, and you would have a standalone reference on UFOs. The abduction part is stories that are based on a storyline that I created based on reports by people who are abductees. And it starts off with a typical situation that some abductee remembers from many years ago, many years before, 30 or 40 years before, events that were unexplainable at the time, but stuck in their mind. And he's starting to have dreams about what happened years and years ago. And he wants somebody to look at this person who turns out to be an abductee. He wants a UFO investigator to look into his abductions and find out if any of this stuff could be true or what it signified, these dreams he was having. And so the main character in the book is a very skeptical, technically oriented type of person who takes on this investigation sort of somewhat reluctantly. But he doesn't believe in UFO stuff. Nevertheless, he decides he has to learn something about it, so he goes to the library and he gets a book called What You Should Know About Unidentified Flying Objects. And he starts to read this book. This inside book is written in an expository manner, not quite like the main part of the book, the abduction story itself. As I said, the fact book part is completely separable from the rest of the book. And as the main character reads through the fact book, he reacts to what he reads, and you, the real reader, can react right along with him and understand what he's saying. Like, for example, you read some of the first part of the fact book, and he says, "This can't possibly be true. If it were, everybody would know about it." Things that are totally logical response to reading something that seems to be impossible, and it takes the guy quite a considerable amount of reading before he is becoming convinced. In the meantime, this fact book on the inside tells you about the history of the subject, the governmental reaction to it, and a whole bunch of different cases that offer as examples of why you should treat this subject seriously, including the abduction stuff.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time here, and there were so many other questions I wanted to ask you as well. You know what, Bruce? I think I really want to ask you. Well, okay, before we end this with a final question, in my work, a lot of the direction of the UFO abductions and the information that's coming to me nowadays, in the sense from researchers, is that there's the word consciousness that's come into the UFO subject, that that these beings or these races that are coming to us for reasons that are not for fear-mongering, but actually here to help us evolve, and that they're highly consciously evolved. These beings are that are behind what's happening here, and it's all about progressing our consciousness in a sense. There's a much bigger picture to the abductions as well. Have you come across that area at all? Just very, very briefly.
Well, in the abduction book, I sort of tackle this problem of what's going on, and basically they say I don't know, but we have to answer the question: do we face love, hate, or indifference? If we face love, if they love us, sort of, maybe because they created us for their children, or something like that. If they hate us, it could be because we belong to somebody else, and they don't like us messing around on the Earth or whatever. A lot of abductees have talked about problems of, you might generalize, situation of the human race polluting the Earth and rendering it unsafe for human habitation or alien habitation. And then there's a question of this indifference, which usually abductees, or very often abductees, report that these creatures are doing whatever they're doing without any thought to the human being involved, sort of a situation of indifference. If we face love, we're probably home free, so to speak, or allowed to really continue. If we face hate, there may be a termination time coming up in the future. And if there's indifference, then they're doing whatever they want to do independent of what we are doing, and the situation will sort of continue like that.
Okay. What would you say then, Bruce, is the most important message of your work?
Well, the most important message of what I've done so far is that they are real. This is taking the first baby step towards understanding what's going on, is to admit that there really is something going on. And I've argued that in the FBI-CIA-UFO book, and also I present evidence in the Abduction of My Life book. There's an overlap of some of the information that's in the FBI book, and it shows up also in the Abduction, the real inner book, and in the Abduction book. And so basically what I said is, there really is something going on, and we better understand it rather than ignoring it, which is sort of what the general society is doing right now.
So true. And Bruce, your website as well for people.
Yes, brumac.8k.com. That's BRUMAC .8k.com. www.brumac.8k.com is my website.
Okay, well, we've been putting your books and your website up throughout this interview as well, so it's been coming up on the screen. And I would just like to say, Bruce Maccabee, just thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you getting up early and joining us to have this wonderful interview with yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been enjoyable.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.